The afternoon sun poured over the Montgomery estate like molten gold, gilding every petal, every polished surface, every whisper of privilege. The gardens had been transformed into a cathedral of luxury, white roses climbing trellises, crystal chandeliers swaying from ancient oaks, tables dressed in ivory linen and silver cutlery that caught the light like diamonds. A string quartet played beneath a canopy of silk, and waiters in spotless uniforms floated between clusters of guests balancing trays of champagne flutes. This was the wedding of the year, and everyone who mattered was there, or so they believed. At the center of the celebration stood Olivia Montgomery, radiant in lace and pearls, her laughter delicate but rehearsed. Beside her, Michael Carter, tall and composed, adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes soft when they drifted toward her but guarded when they swept over the crowd. He had worked his way into this world, through intelligence, charm, and an unyielding will, but part of him still felt like a guest at someone else's banquet. The music swelled as another sleek black car glided up the circular drive. The valet straightened, the murmurs paused. Slowly, the back door opened, and Evelyn Carter stepped out. She moved with deliberate grace, one hand resting lightly on Michael's arm as he offered it to her. Time had softened her frame but not her presence. Her silver hair was swept into neat curls, and her navy blue dress shimmered faintly in the sunlight, elegant, modest, dignified. She wore a pearl brooch shaped like a lily. Its simplicity was the quiet kind of wealth that never needed to announce itself. Michael's smile warmed as he steadied her. "You look perfect, Grandma." She patted his hand, her voice soft yet firm. "And you look like the man your grandfather always knew you'd become." As they walked together down the cobblestone path, guests turned. Conversation stuttered mid-sentence. Some smiled politely, others looked away. Evelyn caught the subtle flickers of discomfort, the quick glances between champagne glasses. She had seen that look all her life, the practiced cordiality that masked judgment. At the grand entrance stood Victoria Montgomery, the bride's mother, draped in a gown that shimmered like frost. Her eyes appraised Evelyn with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a flawed gem. She leaned slightly toward a cousin beside her, her lips curling. "I suppose some people don't know the difference between formal and Sunday best," she murmured, her tone sweet as poisoned honey. A few nearby guests laughed, politely, nervously. Evelyn heard. She did not flinch. Michael's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Evelyn's hand found his arm again. "It's all right, dear," she whispered. "Some lessons take longer to learn than others." Inside, the reception shimmered with excess. The Montgomerys had spared no expense: crystal candelabras, imported orchids, a live band flown in from New York. Every detail screamed status. Yet amid all that noise, Evelyn moved like still water, her calm unsettling precisely because it could not be shaken. She took a seat at one of the outer tables, near the garden's edge. It offered a perfect view of the festivities, and of the small ways people showed their hearts. When she sat, others subtly angled their chairs away. When she greeted a woman in a silver dress, the reply came brittle and short. At one point, a waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Evelyn reached for one. Across the terrace, Victoria's mouth twisted as if she'd tasted something bitter. Evelyn smiled faintly to herself. She had endured far worse than social snubs. The Montgomerys' disdain was almost quaint compared to the real barriers she'd broken in her youth, barriers these people could not imagine. Michael drifted between conversations, polite but distant. Each time someone dismissed his grandmother, he felt the heat rise in his chest. But every time he looked at her, calm as moonlight, he reminded himself of who she was, a woman who never needed to defend her worth to the blind. Near the head table, Richard Montgomery, Olivia's father, held court among his business associates. His laughter rolled through the air like thunder, commanding, performative. Tradition, he declared, raising his glass, is what separates refinement from, well, everything else. Those around him chuckled, eager to agree. Evelyn caught the line, the smug undertone. Her lips curved, not in amusement, but in recognition. She had heard versions of that speech in boardrooms and clubs that once refused her entry. Later, as the first course was served, Michael guided his grandmother to the buffet. Olivia approached them then, her smile nervous. "Mrs. Carter, I'm so happy you could come," she said softly, offering a quick hug. Evelyn's eyes softened. "It means the world to see my grandson so loved." Olivia blushed, glancing toward her mother across the room. I hope you're comfortable. If there's anything you need." "I have everything I need, child," Evelyn said gently. "Your kindness is enough." When Olivia walked away, Evelyn caught the tension in her shoulders, the shame blooming beneath her composure. The girl had a good heart, Evelyn thought. Just trapped in the wrong example. The hours slipped by in a blur of laughter, camera flashes, and clinking crystal. Yet under the perfection, something cold pulsed. Evelyn felt it in every forced smile, every careful word. This family had built their world on appearance, and appearance had taught them blindness. As twilight crept over the gardens, Michael leaned close. "I can't stand this anymore. The way they look at you." She cut him off with a gentle look. "You will not raise your voice at ignorance, my dear. You let time do the teaching." He frowned. "Time." Her smile deepened. "Time, and truth. Both have perfect aim." A hush passed over the terrace as a new guest arrived, a tall man in a charcoal suit, face distinguished, demeanor effortlessly commanding. Murmurs rippled, "Is that William Carter?" Evelyn's eyes flickered briefly toward him, unreadable. But that revelation was for later. For now, she simply folded her hands over her lap and watched as lanterns flickered to life above the garden, their golden glow softening the hard edges of a world too enamored with itself. Let them whisper, she thought. Let them laugh. By night's end, the same mouths that scorned her name would stumble over apologies. As the band began a waltz, the Montgomerys glided across the dance floor, gleaming under chandeliers. Around them, the night shimmered with illusion, until the moment illusion would no longer hold. Because Evelyn Carter had not come to be accepted. She had come to be remembered. And the woman they tried to ignore was about to teach them the meaning of grace, and power. The golden light had faded from the sky, replaced by the soft glow of chandeliers strung from the branches of century-old oaks. Their crystal prisms swayed in the evening breeze, scattering fragments of light across polished silverware and champagne flutes. The wedding had slipped from ceremony into celebration, and laughter rippled across the estate like the hum of an expensive engine, smooth, proud, and practiced. At the center of it all sat the Montgomery family, perfectly framed by luxury. Victoria Montgomery, in her shimmering pearl gown, commanded attention with the subtle tyranny of someone who had spent her life believing the world revolved around her taste. She laughed too loudly, gestured too gracefully, her smile always a fraction too wide. Around her, cousins and business partners orbited like obedient satellites, nodding at every quip, mirroring every smirk. Across the garden, Evelyn Carter watched it all from her corner table, a quiet island amid the glittering crowd. Her teacup steamed gently in her hands. Every so often, a guest would glance her way, curiosity flickering across their faces before fading into the same indifferent smile. The air was thick with the kind of politeness that bruised without leaving a mark. Michael stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight. He had noticed the pattern all evening. Each time Evelyn spoke, conversation around her died. Each time she laughed softly at something, chairs shifted, eyes averted. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, deliberate in their subtlety. And Victoria, ever the conductor of social cues, made sure the rhythm of disdain stayed in tune. "She's charming, isn't she?" Victoria said to a group of relatives, her tone syrupy. Michael's grandmother, such spirit. Though I must admit, I didn't realize navy blue was considered appropriate for formal evening wear. A ripple of laughter followed. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Evelyn's hearing, still sharp despite her years, caught every word. She set her teacup down with care, her expression unchanging. The pianist's melody floated through the air, soft and unhurried, a fitting counterpoint to the ugliness that hid behind fine linen and white roses. "Honestly," Victoria continued, lowering her voice but not her malice, "I tried to convince Olivia that perhaps the Carters might prefer something smaller. A more intimate setting. But she insisted on this grand affair. Family pride, I suppose." Michael turned. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said evenly, his voice low but edged, "my grandmother was invited here as family. She deserves respect." Victoria's lips parted in feigned surprise. "Oh, Michael," she said with a tinkle of laughter. "Don't be so sensitive. I was only teasing." Evelyn's hand brushed his sleeve. "Michael." Just his name, but her tone was a lifetime's lesson. He exhaled slowly, forcing the tension from his shoulders. "Some people," she said softly once Victoria turned away, "use words like mirrors, they show you who they really are." He looked down at her, brow furrowed. "You shouldn't have to endure this." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Endure? My dear boy, I'm studying." She turned her gaze back toward the table of Montgomerys. Their laughter, their whispers, their performative charm, she watched it all, calm and unshaken. Each slight only clarified the truth she already knew: arrogance was loudest when it felt small. At the far end of the reception, a large glass wall reflected the glittering garden like a moving painting. Beyond it, the interior ballroom gleamed with chandeliers and gold drapery, where guests danced, toasted, and exchanged shallow compliments. The reflection distorted their faces slightly, elegant masks floating in the glass. Evelyn's eyes lingered on that reflection, seeing more than the surface showed. She had lived through decades of rooms like this, where people smiled to your face and erased you with the next breath. Once, it had stung. Now, it only saddened her. Young server approached, offering another cup of tea. "Thank you, dear," Evelyn said, her voice kind. "You must be exhausted." The girl smiled shyly. "It's been a long day, ma'am, but it's worth it. Everything looks so beautiful." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Beauty," she said, glancing toward Victoria's table, "can be a distraction from what's missing." The girl tilted her head, puzzled. Evelyn only smiled. "You'll understand someday." As the girl walked away, Richard Montgomery rose to give a short speech. The crowd turned their attention toward him. His voice carried easily, smooth, commanding, used to being listened to. "Family," he began, "is the foundation upon which all success is built. And tonight, we welcome a new branch into our proud lineage. Olivia and Michael, may your union be as enduring as the legacy you inherit." Applause followed. Evelyn clapped politely. The phrasing hadn't escaped her. Your legacy. Not ours. Michael felt it too. His grandmother's hand found his, steadying him again. Let them talk, she murmured. Truth doesn't need a microphone. Victoria leaned toward her friends. He's quite eloquent, isn't he? She whispered. So many of them are when they've had to fight their way up. It's admirable. Admirable, Evelyn repeated softly to herself, her tone neutral. But in her eyes, something flickered, not anger, but a quiet, powerful certainty. Moments later, one of the guests, a middle-aged woman in an emerald gown, wandered over to Evelyn's table, curiosity leading her steps. You must be Michael's grandmother, she said politely, her smile brittle. What a lovely event, isn't it? It is, Evelyn replied, her tone gentle. Though I find beauty most meaningful when it's matched by kindness. The woman blinked, unsure how to respond. Well, yes, of course, she stammered before excusing herself, cheeks flushed. Nearby, Michael caught the exchange and hid a smile. His grandmother never raised her voice, never spoke cruelly, but her words left people thinking, and that was a power far greater than confrontation. Victoria noticed the subtle shift. Guests who had ignored Evelyn earlier now glanced toward her table. There was something magnetic about the old woman's composure, something regal that no designer dress could replicate. The more they whispered, the smaller their own grandeur seemed to feel. And Victoria hated it. As the night deepened, she grew sharper, her laughter more forced. It's such a pity, she said at one point, swirling her wine. So many people lose touch with refinement. But then, I suppose manners are cultural. The word hung heavy in the air. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Michael froze, rage tightening his chest. Before he could react, Evelyn rose from her chair. Slowly, gracefully. The movement alone commanded silence. She picked up her teacup, her voice calm, clear enough to carry. Refinement, she said, isn't measured by the weight of your jewelry or the wine in your glass. It's measured by the light in your heart, and how gently you let it fall on others. The words landed like soft thunder. For a moment, even the music faltered. Evelyn smiled, not smugly, but kindly, and returned to her seat as though nothing had happened. Victoria stared, her confidence cracking, her reflection trembling faintly in the glass wall behind her. She reached for her wine again, her hand unsteady. Across the room, one man had been watching, the same older gentleman who had arrived late, his eyes sharp beneath the low light. He'd seen the exchange, the quiet storm beneath the elegance. And as Evelyn's calm returned to her face, he smiled faintly, as if recognizing an old ally. The whispers began again, but they were different now. The woman they'd tried to ignore had just turned their world's definition of class upside down, and she hadn't even raised her voice. The air in the garden had changed. It wasn't visible, but it was felt, the subtle drop in temperature, the uncertain silences between conversations, the faint tension that rippled under the golden glow of chandeliers. Where laughter had once filled the night like wind through glass, now whispers fluttered cautiously around the tables, carrying Evelyn Carter's words like a quiet echo of truth. Victoria Montgomery could sense it. The authority she wore like perfume was starting to fade. Guests glanced toward her table less often now, their eyes drawn instead to the elderly woman seated calmly at the garden's edge. Evelyn hadn't moved much since her soft but powerful remark about refinement, but somehow her stillness demanded attention. Victoria lifted her wine glass again, her smile fixed and polished. People do love a little drama, don't they? She said lightly to her cousin Amelia. One stray comment and everyone acts like we've had a scandal. Amelia offered a weak chuckle, her gaze flicking nervously toward Evelyn. She's quite dignified, isn't she? Victoria's smile thinned. Dignified? My dear, she's opinionated. There's a difference. At a nearby table, Michael overheard. He clenched his fist beneath the tablecloth, knuckles whitening. Olivia, seated beside him, noticed. Michael, she whispered, her tone pleading, please. It's our wedding day. Don't. He exhaled sharply, forcing his hand open. Don't what? Pretend I didn't hear that. Her eyes darted toward her mother, who was already watching them. Just, not here. Not now. Michael turned away, staring toward the dance floor where guests glided across the polished wood, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing around them. His reflection stared back at him from the glass walls, composed, controlled, but inside, fire coiled tightly in his chest. Across the room, Evelyn felt it too. Even without looking, she sensed her grandson's turmoil. She had raised him to be strong, but also to be still. And now, she saw that lesson trembling on the edge of collapse. She rose from her seat. It was a small motion, but heads turned as if the music itself had paused to make space for her. Evelyn made her way toward the couple, her hand lightly brushing Michael's shoulder when she reached him. Walk with me, dear, she said softly. He followed without question, Olivia watching with a worried frown as they moved away from the tables, down a lantern-lit path that led toward the quieter end of the gardens. The laughter of the crowd faded behind them, replaced by the chirp of crickets and the rustle of night air through rose bushes. For a while, Evelyn said nothing. The silence stretched between them, gentle, deliberate. I can't stand how they talk about you, Michael finally said, his voice breaking the stillness. How they look at you, like you don't belong. You've earned more respect than anyone here. Evelyn smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the moonlit pond ahead. Respect that must be demanded is not worth having, my boy. But you don't have to let them treat you like this, he pressed, his voice low but fierce. They should know who you are. Who I am. She stopped walking, turning toward him. Her eyes, deep, wise, unyielding, met his. If they cannot see it, that blindness belongs to them, not to me. Michael looked away, ashamed. You've always been stronger than me. Evelyn chuckled softly. Strength isn't about shouting louder than the ignorant. It's about living so gracefully that the truth embarrasses them on its own. Her words hung in the night air, quiet and devastating. They stood there a moment longer before heading back toward the festivities. The glow of lanterns flickered against Evelyn's silver curls as she walked, her posture straight, her expression serene. She had spent a lifetime mastering the art of patience, patience that was now teaching an entire generation without her even trying. When they returned, the atmosphere had shifted even further. Guests who had once ignored Evelyn were now glancing toward her table, whispers rippling in her wake. Someone had mentioned her name to a friend who recognized it, from a scholarship foundation, a community trust, a line of businesses that bore quiet philanthropic footprints. The realization was spreading like wildfire through lace and diamonds. Victoria noticed. And with every hushed mention, her control slipped another inch. She rose abruptly and approached Olivia, forcing a brittle smile. Darling, she said through her teeth, why is everyone suddenly fascinated with your husband's grandmother? Olivia blinked, startled. I don't know, Mother. Maybe they just admire her grace. Victoria's nostrils flared. Grace, she repeated, tasting the word like something sour. I see. Then, turning slightly, she caught sight of Evelyn rejoining her table, guests now greeting her, asking polite questions, smiling more genuinely than they had all night. It was as though the balance of the evening had begun to tilt, and Evelyn, without lifting a finger, had become its quiet center. Unbelievable, Victoria muttered, her composure fraying. One speech about kindness and suddenly she's some sort of saint. Richard Montgomery, still seated, sighed and rubbed his temple. Let it go, Victoria. You're drawing attention. I will not be outshone at my daughter's wedding, she hissed. He looked up at her then, weary. Then perhaps you should try shining for the right reasons. She froze, eyes narrowing. Richard had never spoken to her like that in public before. Around them, the whispers continued, a steady undercurrent she could no longer control. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat again beside her teacup, calm as ever. The same young server from earlier passed by and hesitated. Ma'am, she asked softly. What you said before, about beauty and kindness, I think I understand now. Evelyn smiled warmly. Good, she said. That means you're growing faster than most. The girl beamed and hurried away. Michael watched from across the garden, pride blooming quietly in his chest. Every word his grandmother spoke rippled through the crowd like light through glass, gentle, refracted, undeniable. Victoria, on the other hand, had started to crumble beneath her perfection. Her laughter came too quickly now, her posture too rigid, her eyes darting to every whisper. The illusion of effortless superiority she'd spent years curating was cracking, and she knew it. When the band began another song, Olivia approached Evelyn, cheeks flushed with guilt. Mrs. Carter. I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry. About my family. About everything they said. Evelyn looked up, her eyes soft. Child, she said, apologies mean little when whispered to the wounded. Speak them where the wound was made. Olivia hesitated, then nodded slowly. I will. Evelyn reached out and took her hand gently. Good girl. The band swelled, and somewhere beyond the tables, laughter resumed, but it no longer belonged to Victoria. It belonged to those drawn to Evelyn's gravity, to the calm truth that had cut through pretense like silk through smoke. And for the first time that night, as the music danced through the air and the chandeliers shimmered above, Michael realized something profound. Grace could be sharper than anger. And sometimes, the fiercest fire burned with silence, the night deepened into velvet blue, the chandelier's light softening into amber hues that shimmered over crystal glasses and polished silverware. The Montgomery estate, so proud and gleaming hours ago, now carried a strange stillness, like a painting that had started to change while no one was watching. Evelyn Carter sat quietly at her table near the garden's edge, her calm presence somehow louder than the music. She wasn't dressed in jewels, she didn't raise her voice, but the air around her felt altered, as though truth itself had begun to breathe through the party. Conversations that had once danced around shallow topics now circled her name. Across the garden, Victoria Montgomery noticed. Her pearl necklace no longer sparkled with confidence but with irritation. Each laugh, each glance that wasn't about her, cut sharper than a knife. She raised her wine glass again, hoping to steady her composure, but the stem trembled slightly in her hand. Meanwhile, a man sat alone beneath a large oak tree, half in shadow, half in the flicker of golden light. He was in his late 60s, tall, with silver hair neatly combed back, and the kind of posture that spoke of both discipline and power. His tailored suit was simple but immaculate, his tie pinned with understated elegance. His eyes, sharp, assessing, followed Evelyn Carter like a man observing a long-awaited performance. He had been there for nearly an hour, quiet, unnoticed, watching. Every now and then, a guest would approach him, offering a polite smile, a handshake, a greeting wrapped in flattery. But he brushed them off with courteous disinterest, never breaking his gaze from the elderly woman at the far table. When she laughed softly with a passing waiter, his lips curved almost imperceptibly. When someone whispered near her, his jaw tensed, his expression hardening with the quiet protectiveness of someone who knew. Michael noticed him too. Standing beside Olivia on the terrace, Michael's gaze drifted over the crowd until it landed on the man under the oak. Something about him, his presence, the authority that hung in the air around him, felt familiar. "Do you know who that is?" he asked Olivia quietly. She followed his eyes. "I've seen him before. I think my father's spoken about him. William Carter, maybe? He's some sort of philanthropist or investor. Father always said he was impossible to meet." Michael's brow furrowed. "Carter?" Olivia nodded. "Yes, but surely that's a coincidence." Michael didn't answer. A slow unease began to stir within him, but before he could dwell on it, Victoria called out across the terrace, her tone too bright. "Michael. Darling. Won't you come introduce your grandmother to some of our more important guests?" He turned toward her, recognizing the edge in her voice, a mix of condescension and control. "I think Grandma's doing just fine on her own," he replied evenly. Victoria's smile stiffened. "Don't be silly. We wouldn't want her to feel excluded." Olivia winced. "Mother, please." But Victoria was already gliding through the crowd, her gown shimmering like frost, her false warmth cutting through conversations as she approached Evelyn's table. "Mrs. Carter," she said sweetly, placing one manicured hand on the back of Evelyn's chair. "I do hope you're enjoying yourself." Evelyn looked up with that same unshaken serenity. "Very much, thank you." "Lovely." Victoria's smile hardened. "You must forgive any misunderstandings earlier. These events can be so overwhelming for those not accustomed to them." A few guests nearby turned slightly, pretending not to listen. Evelyn set her teacup down gently. "Yes," she said, her tone mild but firm. "It can be overwhelming to mistake etiquette for empathy." For a moment, Victoria froze. The line was so soft, so elegantly spoken, that it took her a second to realize she'd been gracefully outmaneuvered. Her cheeks flushed faintly, though her smile never faltered. "Well," she said with brittle laughter, "perhaps we'll all learn something from each other tonight." "I do hope so," Evelyn said, eyes kind but knowing. Victoria turned away, her composure cracking further. The hum of conversation resumed, but she could feel the quiet judgment of the crowd pressing against her like invisible hands. For the first time that evening, she felt small. Meanwhile, under the oak tree, the mysterious man stood. He adjusted his cufflinks, checked his watch, and began walking toward the reception. His steps were slow, measured, confident. People turned instinctively to look as he passed, his presence impossible to ignore. Michael noticed first. "He's coming this way." Olivia's pulse quickened. "That's definitely William Carter." Evelyn, who had been reaching for her teacup, paused. Her eyes lifted, meeting his across the distance. For a heartbeat, the noise of the wedding fell away. It was as though the entire garden exhaled. Evelyn's calm expression softened, just slightly, something between recognition and fond amusement. Then he smiled. Victoria, sensing the shift in attention, turned just in time to see the distinguished man approaching Evelyn's table. Her first instinct was excitement, finally, a guest of her caliber. She straightened, smoothing her dress, ready to introduce herself. But he didn't even glance at her. Instead, he stopped directly before Evelyn and bowed his head slightly. "Madam Carter," he said warmly. "It's been far too long." The crowd stilled. Evelyn's smile was quiet, graceful. "William," she said softly, her voice rich with familiarity. "You haven't changed." Gasps fluttered through the guests like startled birds. "Madam Carter." The title hung in the air, heavy with reverence. Victoria blinked, disoriented. "Madam," she whispered under her breath. Olivia's father turned pale. William turned toward the gathering crowd. "Many of you may know me," he began, his tone steady but commanding. "But what most of you don't know is that everything I've built, every business, every success, every opportunity, began with this woman." All eyes turned to Evelyn. "She is a pioneer," he continued. "A visionary who built her empire at a time when society refused to see her brilliance. She has funded more scholarships, rebuilt more communities, and opened more doors than any person I've ever met." A hush blanketed the garden. Evelyn sat unmoving, her dignity radiant in its restraint. William's gaze softened. "She taught me that success means nothing if it isn't shared. That true power is lifting others while the world tries to pull them down." Victoria's wine glass trembled in her hand. Richard stared, speechless. Olivia's face had gone pale with realization. And Michael. Michael looked at his grandmother, pride swelling like light breaking through cloud. He had always known she was strong, wise, extraordinary, but he had never realized just how far her legacy reached. Guests began to murmur, shame mixing with awe. People who had ignored her now looked as if they wanted to sink through the floor. Evelyn, calm as ever, offered William a smile. "You always did have a way with speeches." He chuckled. "Only when they're true." The Montgomery estate, once a shrine to arrogance, now felt like a church of revelation. Every eye was on Evelyn Carter, the woman they had tried to ignore, the woman whose name would echo long after the last champagne glass was emptied. And yet she sat there, perfectly still, her grace unmoved by either insult or praise. Because Evelyn had never come to prove who she was. She had come to remind them who they were. A breathless silence fell over the garden. The chandeliers swayed in the breeze, scattering fractured light across faces frozen between disbelief and awe. Every conversation, every whisper, every pretense of composure had dissolved into one stunned collective heartbeat. William Carter stood at the center of the terrace, his tall frame commanding the space effortlessly. The microphone that had been resting on the event podium now felt like an instrument of justice. His voice, smooth and resonant, carried not through amplification, but through the sheer gravity of truth. "Many of you," he began, eyes scanning the glittering crowd, "know me as an investor, an industrialist, a philanthropist. You've read my name in papers, seen it printed on foundation walls. But what you do not know is that none of that would exist without the woman sitting before me tonight." The murmurs returned, low and uncertain. The woman. Evelyn Carter. Victoria Montgomery's hand trembled against her wine glass. The stem snapped, crystal splintering in her fingers. Her gasp echoed louder than she meant it to, drawing eyes that had begun to see her differently now. William continued, his gaze softening as it rested on Evelyn. "When I was a young man with no direction, no education, and no one who believed in me, Evelyn Carter took me in. Not as an employee. Not as a charity case, but as family. Evelyn smiled faintly, eyes glistening under the chandelier light. She taught me the value of work that means something, William said, voice rising. When the doors of business were closed to people like us, she built her own. When banks denied her loans, she founded a credit union. When she was told that success was a privilege of birth, she turned it into a right earned through brilliance, integrity, and heart. The crowd was motionless. Glasses paused mid-air. Forks hovered over half-eaten plates. Michael felt his throat tighten. He had known his grandmother was remarkable, but this was revelation. Across the table, Olivia's lips parted slightly, her gaze flicking between William and Evelyn as if watching history unfold in real time. William turned slightly, addressing the audience now. This woman, Madame Carter, didn't just create wealth. She created legacy. Decades ago, she established the Carter Initiative, a foundation that has provided over 10,000 scholarships to underprivileged students across this country. She built hospitals in neighborhoods others refused to visit. She invested in businesses started by women when investors laughed them out of the room. Every success story you've read with my name attached, she was the beginning of it. Gasps scattered through the guests like tiny explosions. Someone whispered, the Carter Initiative. Another murmured, that's her. Evelyn sat gracefully through it all, her posture unchanged, her hands folded in her lap. Victoria, pale now, leaned toward her husband. She can't be that Carter, she whispered. Not her. Richard Montgomery, usually the most composed man in any room, had gone silent. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by something unrecognizable, fear. The kind of fear born not from danger, but from sudden, humiliating understanding. William glanced toward them, his expression calm but unrelenting. I've attended countless events, spoken at summits, met kings and presidents. But I can tell you now, without a trace of hesitation, there is not a single person of greater importance here tonight than Evelyn Carter. Then, he set down the microphone and bowed his head slightly toward her. The gesture, humble, reverent, was not lost on anyone. A ripple of sound spread through the crowd. Guests who had ignored Evelyn earlier now whispered apologies under their breath. Some stood instinctively, as if rising in respect. Others avoided looking at her altogether, ashamed. Michael's heart pounded with pride. Every time someone bowed their head, his chest grew lighter. For years he had watched his grandmother carry herself with grace through the world's cruelties. Tonight, the world was finally catching up to her truth. Evelyn's eyes softened. She rose slowly from her chair, her every movement deliberate, poised. When she spoke, her voice was steady and warm, like a hymn carried on the wind. Thank you, William, she said. You've always been kind with your words. But I didn't raise you to give me praise. I raised you to give others hope. William smiled faintly, nodding. Evelyn turned toward the crowd. I appreciate your applause, but I didn't come here tonight to be celebrated. I came to witness love. My grandson's love. Her gaze drifted to Michael and Olivia, whose hands were now clasped together tightly. I've lived long enough to know that love, real love, is tested not by wealth or appearances, but by character. And character, she said, her eyes falling gently on Victoria and Richard, is revealed when you think no one is watching. A quiet, collective inhale passed through the guests. Victoria's painted smile trembled. Mrs. Carter, she began, voice thin and unsteady, I want to apologize if I said anything that came across as. Evelyn held up a hand. "There's no need, Mrs. Montgomery. You said exactly what you meant. And in doing so, you showed me exactly who you are." The words were not cruel, yet they landed with more force than any insult ever could. Victoria's face crumpled. She looked toward the ground, unable to meet Evelyn's gaze. Richard cleared his throat, attempting to salvage the family's dignity. "Madam Carter," he said stiffly, "it's an honor to have you here. I had no idea." Evelyn looked at him with quiet finality. "That's the problem, Mr. Montgomery. Too often, people wait to learn someone's worth until they're forced to see it." For several heartbeats, no one spoke. The chandeliers above flickered gently, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was transformative. Then, a slow round of applause began. It started from one table, hesitant but sincere, and spread outward like a wave. Within moments, the entire garden was on its feet. The applause swelled, filling the air with thunderous admiration, not for wealth, not for status, but for dignity. Evelyn smiled humbly, lowering her gaze. Her fingers brushed her brooch, the small pearl lily her late husband had given her decades ago. Beside her, William leaned in quietly. "They'll never forget this night." Evelyn exhaled softly. Nor should they. Across the terrace, Michael slipped an arm around Olivia's shoulders. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she watched her grandmother-in-law glow beneath the golden light. "She doesn't just change rooms," Olivia whispered. "She changes hearts." Michael nodded. "That's what grace does." And as the applause faded into quiet reverence, Evelyn Carter, the woman they tried to ignore, stood in the center of the grand estate, unshaken, unbitter, and more powerful than ever. The night that began in arrogance had turned into a lesson written in humility. And for the Montgomerys, it was a lesson they would never escape. The applause lingered like a soft storm in the night air, rippling through the garden long after William stepped down from the stage. For the first time since the ceremony began, the Montgomery estate no longer felt like theirs. The grandeur, the chandeliers, the manicured roses, all of it now seemed to belong to her. Evelyn Carter. Victoria Montgomery sat frozen at her table, her once perfect posture collapsing inch by inch under the weight of humiliation. Her pearl necklace no longer gleamed but clung to her neck like a chain. She could feel eyes on her, whispers floating like smoke through the crowd. "That's her. She insulted that woman. I can't believe it." Each murmur was another crack in the illusion she'd spent her entire life maintaining. The elegance, the authority, the effortless superiority, gone, shattered in an instant of truth. Beside her, Richard Montgomery's jaw was tight, his hands clasped together in forced composure. He had spent his career mastering the art of control, knowing when to speak, when to command silence, when to dominate a room. But tonight, all his experience meant nothing. The balance of power had shifted, and he could not reclaim it. Across the terrace, Evelyn's quiet laughter floated through the air as she spoke with guests who now hung on her every word. People who had earlier turned their backs on her now leaned in eagerly, desperate to associate themselves with her grace, her history, her strength. And she, elegant, composed, gave them none of what they wanted, only warmth. Because Evelyn Carter did not perform for approval, she taught by example. Olivia stood with Michael a few feet away, her fingers trembling as they entwined with his. Her cheeks were flushed with shame, but also with clarity. The woman her family had mocked had turned out to be the one person worth admiring. "I can't believe my mother," Olivia whispered. Michael's voice was calm but heavy. "I can. I've seen people like her all my life. She thought wealth gave her worth. But tonight, she found out the truth, it only revealed what was missing. Olivia swallowed hard. I should have stopped her. I should have said something. Evelyn, overhearing as she approached, smiled softly. And now you know the difference between silence and peace, dear. Silence protects pride. Peace protects truth. Olivia turned to her, eyes glistening. I'm so sorry. Evelyn reached out and took her hand gently. The apology is not yours to carry. Behind them, Victoria rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble terrace. The sound cut through the music and conversation like a blade. Heads turned. She smoothed her dress, forcing a brittle smile. Well, she said, her tone falsely bright, this has certainly been enlightening. Evelyn looked at her, her expression serene. Indeed, it has. Victoria hesitated, then attempted a laugh. I must say, Madam Carter, you're quite full of surprises. If I'd known. Evelyn interrupted, her tone neither harsh nor kind, simply true. If you'd known, you would have behaved differently. And that's exactly the problem. The silence that followed was deafening. The chandeliers swayed slightly above them, as if even the air itself wanted to retreat from the tension. Victoria's smile faltered. I didn't mean any disrespect, she said quickly. No, Evelyn replied. You didn't mean it. You believed it. There's a difference. The words landed like stones in still water, sending invisible ripples through the crowd. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Even Richard's stoic mask cracked as he looked at his wife, realizing that for once, no wealth or influence could rescue them from this. Victoria's lips quivered. Mrs. Carter, please, I. But Evelyn stopped her again, her voice soft but final. Mrs. Montgomery, I have no anger toward you. You showed me who you are. I only hope one day you see it too. Then, with quiet grace, she turned away. That simple gesture, that refusal to retaliate, was the finishing blow. Evelyn didn't need to raise her voice or demand an apology. She had transcended the need for their approval entirely, and that absence of ego humbled everyone watching. The Montgomery matriarch, who had once ruled every social event she hosted, now stood small and exposed in front of her guests. Her foundation, built on pride, status, and pretense, had cracked open under the weight of a truth she could no longer deny. Richard, at last, rose to his feet. His eyes, once confident and cold, now carried something uncertain, remorse, perhaps, or the faint stirring of shame. Madam Carter, he said, stepping forward slightly. I'd like to apologize, on behalf of my family, for any offense that. Evelyn turned back to him gently. Mr. Montgomery, apologies don't repair character. Only change does. He froze, his throat tightening around the words he'd planned to use as shields. I understand, he murmured, his voice low. I hope so, Evelyn said. For your daughter's sake. She looked toward Olivia, her expression softening again. You have a good heart, my dear. Don't let the world teach you to hide it. Olivia nodded, tears threatening to spill. For a long moment, the garden was silent, but not empty. The hush was filled with understanding, humility, and something like rebirth. The Montgomerys had been stripped of their arrogance, laid bare before the same people who once bowed to their influence. The music resumed softly, a gentle piano melody floating through the air. Guests began to speak again, though their voices carried a new timbre, cautious, reflective. William approached Evelyn once more, offering his arm. "I think that's enough lessons for one evening," he said lightly. Evelyn smiled. "Lessons only end when understanding begins." He chuckled softly. "You haven't changed." She looked toward the Montgomerys, Victoria standing still as marble, Richard silent beside her, and replied, "Neither has the world. It just—" The music had softened into something slow and wistful, the kind that plays when a celebration has passed its peak and truth has begun to settle in. The chandeliers above the garden trembled gently in the breeze, their light glinting off half-empty champagne flutes and abandoned plates. What had begun as the Montgomerys' crowning moment of social grandeur now felt like an open confessional beneath the stars. Evelyn Carter sat at her table once more, her composure untouched, her presence somehow calming the restless air around her. The guests who had earlier avoided her now approached in quiet clusters, businessmen, socialites, young women clutching glasses of wine, each eager to offer a handshake, a compliment, or a timid apology masked as admiration. "You've built quite the legacy, Madam Carter," one man said, his voice carrying the careful politeness of someone desperate to redeem himself. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Legacies aren't built on admiration," she replied. "They're built on what you give when no one's watching." The man nodded awkwardly, realizing she had just dismissed the need for his validation. Evelyn's words, gentle though they were, had a way of reshaping people. She didn't lecture, she reflected, and in her reflection, others saw who they truly were. Across the terrace, Michael Carter stood by the railing, staring out over the gardens lit by lanterns. He had spent most of the evening holding back his anger, his pride, his frustration. Now, watching his grandmother, the woman he adored, being quietly revered by those who had once dismissed her, he felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. He heard footsteps behind him. "Olivia's." "Michael," she said softly, her voice almost carried away by the night air. He didn't turn right away. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. "You saw how they treated her." The music had softened into something slow and wistful, the kind that plays when a celebration has passed its peak and truth has begun to settle in. The chandeliers above the garden trembled gently in the breeze, their light glinting off half-empty champagne flutes and abandoned plates. What had begun as the Montgomerys' crowning moment of social grandeur now felt like an open confessional beneath the stars. Evelyn Carter sat at her table once more, her composure untouched, her presence somehow calming the restless air around her. The guests who had earlier avoided her now approached in quiet clusters, businessmen, socialites, young women clutching glasses of wine, each eager to offer a handshake, a compliment, or a timid apology masked as admiration. "You've built quite the legacy, Madam Carter," one man said, his voice carrying the careful politeness of someone desperate to redeem himself. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Legacies aren't built on admiration," she replied. "They're built on what you give when no one's watching." The man nodded awkwardly, realizing she had just dismissed the need for his validation. Evelyn's words, gentle though they were, had a way of reshaping people. She didn't lecture, she reflected, and in her reflection, others saw who they truly were. Across the terrace, Michael Carter stood by the railing, staring out over the gardens lit by lanterns. He had spent most of the evening holding back his anger, his pride, his frustration. Now, watching his grandmother, the woman he adored, being quietly revered by those who had once dismissed her, he felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. He heard footsteps behind him. "Olivia's." "Michael," she said softly, her voice almost carried away by the night air. He didn't turn right away. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. "You saw how they treated her." "I did," she admitted. "And I did nothing." Michael finally turned. Why? Her eyes shimmered with regret. Because I was raised to keep the peace, to smile and stay quiet, to never challenge my parents in public. But now I see that silence is just another kind of cruelty. He studied her, the woman he had chosen to marry, torn between love and disappointment. I didn't need you to defend her for me, he said quietly. I needed you to see her for who she is. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. I see her now, she whispered. I see everything. Michael's voice softened. Then start there. Seeing is the first step. Behind them, the faint sound of Evelyn's laughter drifted across the terrace. It was warm, light, and forgiving, the kind of sound that healed more than it hurt. Olivia looked toward her, heart aching. I have to speak to her, she said. Michael nodded. Then go. Olivia crossed the garden slowly, her heels pressing into the cobblestone path. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the significance of her approach. Evelyn noticed her coming and smiled gently, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Sit, child, she said, as if she'd been expecting her. Olivia obeyed, hands trembling in her lap. Mrs. Carter. Evelyn, the older woman corrected softly. Your family now. That simple word, family, nearly undid her. Olivia's throat tightened. Evelyn. I owe you an apology. For my mother, for my father, for myself. Evelyn regarded her with patient eyes. An apology is only the beginning of change. The rest is how you live after you've learned better. I want to learn, Olivia said earnestly. I want to do better. I don't want to be like them. Evelyn smiled, her expression kind but measured. Then remember this, people of grace aren't defined by what they have, but by what they give away, respect, compassion, forgiveness. Your mother has wealth but no peace. Don't inherit her emptiness. Olivia nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. You're right. I've lived in a world where image was everything. But tonight I saw what real worth looks like. Evelyn reached over and took her hand. Then you've already begun to change. For a moment, neither spoke. The music swelled faintly in the distance, a tender instrumental piece that seemed to mirror the rhythm of their breathing. Around them, the once judgmental crowd had transformed into quiet observers, drawn to the authenticity of the moment. Then, a familiar voice broke the stillness. Madam Carter. Evelyn turned to see Victoria Montgomery standing a few feet away. Her perfect hair had begun to fall loose from its elegant twist, her expression drawn and uncertain. The proud woman who once commanded rooms now looked smaller, almost fragile. Olivia rose instinctively. Mother, she said softly. Victoria hesitated, her hands clasped tightly together. I'd like a moment. Please. Olivia glanced at Evelyn, who nodded. Go ahead, dear. Victoria took a cautious step forward. Her voice, though trembling, carried genuine emotion. I wanted to say I was wrong. I judged you before I knew you. I was cruel without reason. And now I see that everything I thought made me superior has only made me blind. Evelyn listened silently, her face unreadable. Victoria swallowed hard. You have every right to hate me. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Hate is heavy, Mrs. Montgomery. I learned long ago not to carry it. Victoria's lip quivered. Then, what do you carry? Grace, Evelyn said simply. Because it lightens the steps of those who come after you. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Her eyes shimmered as she exhaled shakily. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," Evelyn replied gently. "But you can grow from it. That's where change begins." For a long moment, the two women, so different in age, background, and understanding, stood in silence beneath the chandelier's glow. And in that stillness, something fragile yet profound passed between them. Humility. Victoria nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. Evelyn gave a small, kind smile. "Don't thank me, dear. Just remember." When Victoria turned away, Olivia caught her mother's arm. For the first time in years, she saw sincerity behind the older woman's polished exterior. "You did the right thing," Olivia said softly. Victoria exhaled. "No, she did. And I finally listened." At the far end of the terrace, Michael had been watching, not out of suspicion, but quiet admiration. He walked over and slipped his arm around Olivia's waist, his voice low. "Looks like the Montgomery women are finally learning from a Carter." Olivia smiled faintly through her tears. "No," she said, glancing toward Evelyn. "We're learning from a woman who never forgot who she was." Evelyn looked at them, pride glowing in her eyes. "And that, my dear, is the greatest lesson of all." As the night stretched on, laughter began to return, softer, genuine this time. The weight of arrogance had lifted, replaced by something cleaner: humility, gratitude, respect. The grand estate no longer felt like a stage for pretense but a place where transformation had quietly taken root. Evelyn watched the young couple on the dance floor, Michael and Olivia swaying gently beneath the chandeliers, their hands entwined, their eyes full of new understanding. William Carter approached from behind, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You've done it again," he said quietly. "You didn't just change minds. You changed hearts." Evelyn smiled, her gaze never leaving the couple. "Hearts are stubborn things," she murmured. "But even stone softens under light." And as the night melted into dawn's first silver hint on the horizon, Evelyn Carter, the woman once ignored, had become the measure of grace itself. Her lesson was complete. The last of the candles burned low, their wax pooling in silver holders like softened pearls. The garden that had once glittered with champagne and arrogance was quiet now. Only the soft strains of the string quartet remained, their melody gentle, almost prayerful. It was the sound of a night exhaling, the sound of something ending and something finer beginning. Evelyn Carter stood near the marble fountain at the edge of the terrace, her reflection rippling across the dark water. The stars shimmered above her, patient witnesses to the slow undoing of pride. The guests had drifted home in subdued groups, voices lowered, laughter replaced by contemplation. For the first time that evening, silence felt cleansing. William Carter approached with 2 cups of tea. He offered one wordlessly. "Still keeping to my habits, I see," Evelyn said with a smile. "Some things never change," he replied. "You turned a wedding into a sermon tonight." Evelyn chuckled softly. "I didn't preach. I simply let the truth breathe for a while." William sipped his tea, eyes scanning the quiet estate. "Do you think they understood?" "They will," she said. "Understanding often comes in the morning." He nodded. "And you? Are you satisfied?" Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the ballroom windows, where faint light still glowed. Inside, she could see Michael and Olivia dancing slowly, their foreheads touching, their movements tender and unhurried. Around them, a few remaining guests watched with warmth instead of envy. "Satisfied?" she echoed softly. Yes. Because tonight, kindness finally spoke louder than money. Behind her, footsteps sounded, hesitant, measured. Victoria Montgomery approached, no longer the pristine hostess of the evening. Her gown was slightly wrinkled, her hair undone, her eyes weary yet different, quieter, humbled. "Mrs. Carter," she began. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual polished tone. "I didn't want the night to end without saying thank you." Evelyn turned, her expression gentle but reserved. "Thank you for what, my dear?" For not embarrassing me when you could have," Victoria said. "For showing me what grace looks like. I've spent my whole life trying to look powerful, and tonight I saw how small that made me." Evelyn tilted her head, studying her. "Power built on fear collapses quickly. But humility endures." Victoria nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can change overnight." "No one can," Evelyn said. "But awareness is the first brick in a stronger foundation." Victoria hesitated, then whispered, "Would you ever forgive me?" Evelyn smiled. "I already did. Long before you asked." Forgiveness isn't for the offender, it's for the one who refuses to carry the weight of anger. Tears slipped down Victoria's cheeks. "I'll remember that." "I know you will," Evelyn said softly. As Victoria turned away, Richard Montgomery emerged from the ballroom, his face drawn. He paused before Evelyn, struggling to find the words that had always come easily in boardrooms but now failed him. "Madam Carter," he said finally, voice low. "I was wrong." Evelyn met his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "You were." He swallowed hard. "If there's ever a chance to make amends." "There's always a chance," she interrupted gently, "but not every debt is paid with money. Change the way you treat those who have less power than you. That will be payment enough." Richard bowed his head, the gesture foreign yet sincere. "I understand." When he left, Evelyn looked once more at the fountain's reflection, three faces fading into ripples, pride, repentance, and peace. Michael appeared then, his hand still wrapped around Olivia's. "Grandma," he said softly, "it's getting late. The driver's ready." Evelyn turned toward him, her smile tinged with quiet pride. "Late for what, child?" "I've been waiting." "Mrs. Carter," she began. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual polished tone. "I didn't want the night to end without saying thank you." Evelyn turned, her expression gentle but reserved. "Thank you for what, my dear?" For not embarrassing me when you could have," Victoria said. "For showing me what grace looks like. I've spent my whole life trying to look powerful, and tonight I saw how small that made me." Evelyn tilted her head, studying her. "Power built on fear collapses quickly. But humility endures." Victoria nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can change overnight." "No one can," Evelyn said. "But awareness is the first brick in a stronger foundation." Victoria hesitated, then whispered, "Would you ever forgive me?" Evelyn smiled. "I already did. Long before you asked." Forgiveness isn't for the offender, it's for the one who refuses to carry the weight of anger. Tears slipped down Victoria's cheeks. "I'll remember that." "I know you will," Evelyn said softly. As Victoria turned away, Richard Montgomery emerged from the ballroom, his face drawn. He paused before Evelyn, struggling to find the words that had always come easily in boardrooms but now failed him. "Madam Carter," he said finally, voice low. "I was wrong." Evelyn met his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. You were. He swallowed hard. If there's ever a chance to make amends. There's always a chance, she interrupted gently, but not every debt is paid with money. Change the way you treat those who have less power than you. That will be payment enough. Richard bowed his head, the gesture foreign yet sincere. I understand. When he left, Evelyn looked once more at the fountain's reflection, 3 faces fading into ripples, pride, repentance, and peace. Michael appeared then, his hand still wrapped around Olivia's. Grandma, he said softly, it's getting late. The driver's ready. Evelyn turned toward him, her smile tinged with quiet pride. Late for what, child? I've been waiting. For this night all my life. He frowned gently. You mean to see me married? To see you become, she said. To see you stand tall without anger, to see forgiveness take root where resentment could have grown. That's the real wedding gift. Olivia stepped forward, her eyes bright with gratitude. Evelyn, before you go. I just want you to know that you've changed me. I don't want to live like my parents did. I want to live like you, with purpose, with compassion. Evelyn reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. Then start with the small things, dear. The way you speak to a waiter, the way you listen to someone unseen. Every act of kindness adds to your legacy. Olivia nodded, her heart full. I'll make sure our children know your name. Evelyn laughed softly. Make sure they know your heart first. My name will follow. William placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Come, old friend. It's time. Evelyn nodded, then turned back toward the young couple. You two, she said, her voice firm yet tender, build a home where grace lives louder than ego. The world has enough fine houses and not enough kind hearts. Michael embraced her tightly. I promise. She kissed his forehead. Good. Keep that promise when life tests you, and it will. As she stepped toward the waiting car, the night breeze lifted her silver curls. She paused at the edge of the path, turning one last time. The garden, bathed in candlelight, shimmered like a dream of redemption. Victoria and Richard stood together near the fountain, speaking quietly, not arguing, not posturing, but listening. Evelyn smiled. William, she murmured as they walked, people spend fortunes chasing peace. They never realize it's the one thing you can't buy. He glanced at her. You've always known that. She looked up at the sky. Knowing isn't enough. You have to live it and teach it.